It's time for the show about the people and the places of the Carolinas with the occasional visitors. In addition to hosting the award-winning syndicated TV show Life in the Carolinas, Carl White writes a weekly syndicated column and now hosts this weekly show, the Life in the Carolinas podcast. Now you can hear the story about the stories. And now, here's your host, Carl White.
Jan, it's great to see you again.
Same to you, Carl.
Oh my gosh, what has it been? Several years. You were in this room with Charlotte and Bill Barnes.
I was.
As Charlotte was talking about her great adventures with Tom Dooley and Laura Foster. And I remember you were visiting from your homeland, and I was amazed because you, living in another country, had become fascinated with the story of Tom Dooley.
I did. I of course, like Charlotte, I heard the song when I was a kid.
Right.
But thought it was just a song.
Well, tell folks where you grew up from.
Well, I grew up in Denmark, in a suburb of Copenhagen, the capital city of Denmark.
And tell folks your name.
My name is Jan Kronsell.
Yes.
That's my last name. And I'm actually of Swedish origin. That's
right.
Kronsell is a Swedish name, but my family has lived in Denmark for generations.
And what town do you live in?
I live in a small suburb called Brøndby.
Okay.
Which is about 10 miles from the center of Copenhagen.
Right. And you grew up doing what?
Going to school.
You grew up going to school, but
yeah. then
you stayed, right?
When I got out of school, I joined the Navy and was in the Navy for about 12 years.
Right.
And ended up as a lieutenant commander. And then I was tired of being in the Navy, so I decided to try something else. So I became an IBM system engineer.
Wow.
And worked as an IBM systems engineer for about 8 years. And then I became a business college teacher, which I'm still.
Wow.
So now 30 years, a business college teacher.
So you started out in school, and now I'm
back in school. I'm back in school
again.
Yes. Yes.
Well, that explains so much, because I was so surprised, because I knew you were coming into town and you had sent me your schedule, and we of course were, I wanted to get together with you. And here, this is the last day you're in North Carolina.
I have to be back because my employer wants me to work on Friday.
This week.
So I have to be back tomorrow. Then I have 1 day to sleep, and I can be back at work on Friday.
And then you're back. Well, the reason I wanted us to set and catch up in podcast form was because of what you handed me when you walked into my office.
Yeah.
And it's this book that I knew something was going to be coming because of your interest in Tom Dooley and Laura Foster. But this book is Who Killed Laura Foster?
Yeah.
And it's got Jan's name at the top of it in the back, and it says, my view on a 150-year-old murder.
Yeah, I didn't want to say this is the truth about the murder, because I know it's not. It's just my point of view.
Right.
Because the truth will never be found unless someone invents a time machine.
You mean a provable proof?
A provable proof.
Proof.
So if anyone invents a time machine and asks me to go back, I will.
Right.
But until then, it will just be speculations.
Right. Now, do you think that's because of your analytical, smart mind, and you just you're like, well, factually, I can't be for sure, but there are a lot of people that talk about the story of Tom Dooley and Laura Foster, and they're pretty darn sure of what happened.
Yeah. In the book, I start with the part that is facts, known facts, and then I enter into speculation when I want to figure out who did it, and that can only be speculations.
All right, so let's talk about how this came about. This is certainly a topic that fits us in the Carolinas because of Tom Dooley and Laura Foster, both being Carolinas people. And this was at an interesting time, Civil War time for America. So that was a pivotal moment,
It was, and it was during the Reconstruction era after the Civil War. So people were suffering quite a lot. There were many poor people who didn't know how to make their day. So it was a tough time.
Yeah. Well, what was it about the story that has so drawn you in? And then we'll get into it because, Jan, I mean, this hasn't been a small project. Truthfully, since I've known you, this is what you've been obsessed by.
Yeah, I've been working on this on and off since 2002.
Wow.
And it was published in 20, so it's about 18 years.
Right.
Not all the time, of course, but on and off. And it all started back in 2002 when I was on Blue Ridge Parkway, and there's a pullout called The Lump. And at The Lump, there's a sign telling about the Tom Dooley story, and in neighboring Wilkes County, blah, 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 blah. And when I saw that sign, I decided it's not just a song.
Right.
So I started researching.
So that was the point. So you're telling me that you were in North Carolina.
I was
on the top of a mountain.
Yeah.
You see a sign and you read it and you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
This is real.
Yeah. Actually, my ex-wife had told me about the sign because she had been here back in 1998.
Right.
So we were looking for the sign. She didn't remember quite where it was, but we found it. And then I decided I have to look into this. So first I used the internet, but got, I think, more confused than I was in the first place because I found a lot of websites telling different stories.
Right.
Not one single of them told the same story. So I don't remember how I got in touch or found out, but John Foster West have written a book, The Ballad of Tom Dooley.
Right.
And I bought that book, and that was the first book I read with some real facts in the book. And that set me off.
So that got you on the journey.
Yeah. Then 2 years later, I was back in North Carolina, and that was my first visit to Whippoorwill Academy out in Ferguson.
Right.
And I had a long, nice chat with the founder, Edith Ferguson Carter. We became friends.
Right.
Or at least acquaintances. Right. And I visited her several times, and we discussed the story. And I have to say, she didn't agree with me. And she told me so.
Right.
It was not the story she knew that I was telling.
So you had a different view because of what you were researching.
Yeah.
She had a view because of her life's journey.
She had been told the story by her father.
Right.
Who... He wasn't alive at the time, but almost. So he had heard it from his father, and
so it had been passed down traditionally.
So the story she knew was the story she preferred.
Right. Well,
and I came up with some other solutions to have done it.
So did she tell you to get back to your country, or did she? No. Was open arms.
She was very welcoming. Anyway, even if we didn't agree on the story, and
Edith is just an absolute wonderful human being.
She was, and the last time I met her was back in 2013 in October, just about 6 months before she passed.
It's hard to believe that time has passed. And now Whippoorwill has certainly continued. Her daughter is, wow.
Now I'm visiting Margaret, her daughter, instead of Edith.
Yeah, so now that's happening, and it's... she's an educator as well, and an artisan. And has done some wonderful things with Whippoorwill Academy.
I think back in 2013, there was a book by John Fletcher, The True Story of Tom Dooley or something. And I talked to Edith about that book, and then she said, very soon a new book will come out. Much better. The best book ever. And I bought that book in 2016 at the Wilkes Heritage Museum.
And which book was that?
That was the book, The Tom Dooley Files by Charlotte Corbin Barnes.
Oh, yes.
And I brought it back home. I read the book, and I don't know what made me do it, but I sent a mail to Charlotte. I said, I read your book, and
you actually wrote a letter?
No, a mail. Email.
Email, okay.
Yeah, I wrote an email to Charlotte, and we exchanged emails for a while. Then she said, if you ever come back to North Carolina, we should meet up. And I did in 2017. I was invited to visit Charlotte and her husband Bill in their home in Matthews.
Yes.
And we have been in touch ever since.
Now, was that the same trip that you came to Wilkes and Bill and Charlotte came up as well?
I think it was.
And we met at Doula's restaurant in Wilkesboro
we had
for lunch
for lunch, with a lot of descendants of Doulas and some who took part in the play out in the amphitheater.
I remember that.
Yeah.
What an amazing thing. You know, you have gone on a journey, and Charlotte had as well. Charlotte sat in the same seat that Charlotte and Bill both have been here, and sharing their stories. You were with them once when they were sharing their stories.
I was with them the first time here,
And that's, to me, that's an amazing thing because of her life's journey of being a documentarian and having all this information from years ago on Tom Dooley, and then later in life it resurfaced, and then she started working on a new book.
I think if I remember right, she told me that she saw an article in a local newspaper about a woman who was opening a Tom Dooley museum, and that was Edith.
That's right.
So she contacted Edith, and they became great friends.
Yeah, well, you know, that's Charlotte's just is a prolific writer. She does a wonderful job. So
then Charlotte, we had this lunch here, but she also arranged a meeting down in Statesville at the Statesville Historical Collection, and at that meeting, Steve Hill, who runs the place, was there, and Rob McHale, the singer-songwriter.
That's right.
And Karen Reynolds, who wrote the play. That plays here in Wilkesboro, and her husband was there, and there were some other Tom Dooley aficionados as well. And I met a lot of them then and was introduced to them, and I still see some of them.
It is a collective, isn't it?
It is. I think either you hate the story, you get bored by it, or you get caught by it.
Yes. I think there's an inner sanctum of true aficionados who are, it's a blend of historians, professional historians, writers, journalists, people that have really spent a lot of time at looking at a lot of the different ideas and angles of it. Maybe that's what keeps us coming back.
I think so, because there are so many people that you share interest with, and we don't always agree. Of course not, because we are different people and we have different views on the story. But I learned, even this time, I learned some new stuff about the story. I was having lunch with John Hawkins. You know John Hawkins he was a former director of Caldwell Historical Museum.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, I had lunch with him, and he told me about a correspondence he had with a lady, and now he has sent me a copy of this correspondence. It was about Laura Foster's grave out in Elkville.
Right.
If it's truly her grave or not.
So, what's the letter say?
Yeah, letter says not.
No.
Because this lady he was corresponding with, her family owned this area. And there were some aerial photos from around 1950, and there was no grave in these aerial photos. The grave was only made when the song came out around the Kingston Trio song in 1958.
Right. So her contingency is, we didn't see it from the air then, so it must not have been there.
No, and she also tells a story of how come it was placed there. And
why?
I heard the story from Margaret Martini last time I was here, but there was this field, and they were I don't know what you call it in English, but you use a skith to move the lawn, and there was an area where the guy who moved the lawn never got to, and when people asked him, why do you avoid this area, he said, that's because that's Laura Foster's grave. But in reality, it was because there was sumac in that area, and he didn't want to
get poisoned up.
Yeah, exactly. And then when it came, they needed a place to the grave. Apparently, they put it there. This lady, I also mentioned this in my book. Before I even heard about this lady, I think she's buried on why should they bury her far away from where she lived when there was a cemetery right next to the place? Right. I'm sure she's buried in some unmarked grave up in that abandoned cemetery in German Hill.
So you think that? So that wouldn't be that far away.
It wouldn't. It would be right next to where they lived.
Right. Wow.
And this lady, without knowing me, she just agreed with me.
What did Margaret say about the idea?
She was the first one to tell me that this was actually an anecdote, that this was where her grave was.
In the cemetery?
Not in the. Margaret didn't talk about the cemetery. She just talked about the place where the grave is said to be.
Right.
And told me this story about the guy who just mowed the lawn without taking the last.
Well, I like that story.
Yeah,
that's a good one. I think that the folklore about it all doesn't change the realities of what happened. Right? It's like
I thought it could be nice to take a ground penetrating radar and see if there was actually a grave down there.
Oh, sure.
But that would remove most of the romance if there wasn't.
Right.
Now, today there is this legend that Laura and Tom visit each other's graves as ghosts. Right. And that would go away if there wasn't a grave there.
Well, I think the best thing about the Laura Foster and Tom Dooley story is that people still talk about it.
Yeah.
And it's the possibilities. And we can sit here. I have my thoughts as well.
Yeah.
But I like hearing different opinions, different thoughts, because sometimes it's just like, oh, wow, that's interesting.
I was talking with so many people about the story. Everybody has their own version of the story.
Right.
And I think that's great, because that's what Karen Reynolds told me when she wrote her novel. It was not about telling the truth, it was about keeping the legends alive.
Keeping it alive.
And I think it's very important to keep the legends alive, because from the legends, no legend is telling the truth, but all legends contains a little bit of truth. So if by comparing the legends, you may find some truth, at least.
Well, I think the good thing is that there's absolute fact tied to it. They were truly people in the Carolinas.
Yes.
There's no doubting that Tom Dooley, served in the military, was a musician, and he came back and he ended up on trial. And,
and was hanged down in Statesville.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's the facts.
Yeah.
You can read from trial records, from contemporary newspaper articles, so that's facts.
Right.
So, but what really happened, we don't know.
Yeah, we don't do it.
I think the most people around Ferguson claims that Ann Melton did the deed.
Yes.
And Tom just helped her bury the body. I don't think either of them was involved.
You don't?
No.
Well, I was getting ready to say, what do you think? So you
actually,
think...
I present in my book, I present 3 possible perpetrators, where I believe more in one than in the 2 others, but I think I would present them. One is James Isbell, who was Tom's eager pursuer. Even for some reason, he have managed to avoid being part of the legends, but he was in real life. He was the one who provided witnesses, who paid for the prosecution's
and
assistance.
His name again is
James Isbell, Colonel James Isbell.
Okay.
I don't think it was him. I don't think it was him, but he's a possibility, only because he was so eager to get Tom convicted. So besides that, I have no proof of anything, and I don't actually think he did it, but I present him as one possibility. The other I present is her father, actually.
Her father?
Yeah, that comes from a policeman I know who has worked homicide in Denmark for more than 25 years, and he says when a woman is murdered, is very often a relative.
Right.
And her father acted strange after her disappearance, at least according to the few surviving records. He accepted that she had ran away with a black man. He apparently had said all he wanted was his horseback. He didn't care what happened to his daughter. And there was several other things. He didn't involve anyone in the search for Laura until some days have gone.
All right, wait a minute, Jan. So let me get this right. So you're in Denmark.
I am.
In a bar having a beer with your police buddy.
Yeah. Actually, we were working together.
You were working together, all right?
On a secondary job.
So let's talk about how this came up and what was his level of interest.
He was not interested in this case at all. We just talked murders in general.
Okay.
And he said there were two things I learned from him. One, he had never come across a murder with a knife with only one stab. Someone was killed with one stab from time to time, but not a...
passion.
Yeah, from passion, but not a... no one wanted to kill someone and did it purposely with only one stab. There were always several stabs or the throat was cut.
Right.
Not just one stab, because you can't be sure to hit the heart.
Right.
So that was the one thing. And then he said, there are three kinds of people we look into, and one is relatives. The other one is those who discovers the body, and then finally we look into whoever else it can be. So that was what I learned from him. I have talked to a lot of people without telling them why. I even spoke to my old physician about the the remedies used to treat syphilis at the time.
Right.
Because there was a lot. I think it's called blue mass.
Right.
And it contains a large amount of mercury.
Oh yeah.
That could
drive you crazy.
Drive you crazy. Yes,
That's
exactly.
Right. That's right.
So maybe that have played a role as well, because Tom Dooley was treated for syphilis, and Melton was treated for syphilis. Laura Foster was treated for syphilis, and Pauline Foster, and maybe even James Melton. We don't know that for sure, but.
So isn't that one of the thought processes that entire gang kind of, they were friendly with each other?
I think most of them were. Most of them were friendly with each other.
So
at least Pauline Foster admitted that when she arrived she lived in Watauga County. When she arrived in Wilkes County, it was to get treatment from Dr. Carter, who was the only physician in the area.
Well, I know that Tim has been fascinated with the Tom and Laura story for years now. What do you have to ask? What do you have to ask Jan, Tim?
I'm kind of curious on that new scenario that you just talked about. How many people would have known about the rendezvous?
I don't know. That's the problem. We only have the knowledge of the rendezvous from one witness, which was Betsy Scott, who claimed to have met Laura in the morning she left her home, and that she was going to meet Tom at Bates Place, a place called Bates Place, an abandoned smithy, I think it was.
Right.
That's the only witness who tells anything about this rendezvous. I guess it's right, but I'm not sure it was Tom that he was actually meeting, because it could have been anyone.
Right.
And if I were Tom, I'm not, but if I were Tom and I had killed Laura, I wouldn't move the body closer to my own home. I would have moved it further away from my own home. But the body was actually found much closer to Tom's home than where the murder took place.
Right.
So either he had been really stupid or... No, I don't think he did it. I'm not sure about her father as well. When I saw...
So you're merely presenting possibilities.
Three possibilities. I'm presenting three possibilities, and then I leave it up to people self to decide.
Right, and these are possibilities that are based on criminal behavior, human behavior.
And also what's left of the trial records.
Right.
The testimonies that I don't think all are too great.
Right.
Someone believes nobody dared lie in court. I think they lied all the time.
Right.
If it could get themselves off the hook.
Sure.
The final suspect I have is Anne's younger brother, Thomas Foster.
Why?
He was working outside the morning that Laura passed by on her horse, but he claims he never saw her, and that sounds strange because he must have passed right before where if she passed the way that the map shows she went to Bates Place, she have just passed by their house, and he was working in the fields. So that's one reason. The other reason is that he apparently had a large brawl with Tom at one time without telling what it was about. And finally, he could have done it. And if he had buried the body, he could have told his sister, so that could be the reason Anne knew where the body was buried. I don't know. It's just a possibility, in my opinion. Besides this book, I also wrote a novella that was published before this one.
I remember.
And in the novella, that is the plot. Anne's brother Thomas killed Laura, and Anne and her family helped bury the body. But that is, of course, fiction, pure fiction. There's nothing except fiction in that.
Do you believe that Tom did it?
No. I'm almost certain he did not, and I try to argue that he simply wouldn't have had the time. The timetable from that Friday morning doesn't fit with Tom being the murderer, neither Anne. Anne returned to her own home before Laura even left her home, and she stayed in bed all day. Tom was visiting Anne in the morning, I think around 8, and then visited Laura Foster, and then returned to his own home and stayed in his bed until noon, when his mother returned from, I think, watching the cows or whatever she was doing. And Pauline was working in the field with James Melton, so I don't think any of them could have done it due to the time. So I have an idea that some of the witnesses remembered wrong. I don't think they lied, but some of those people who said they met Tom that Friday morning, I think they remembered wrong. You have to remember it was 6 months later.
Right.
So, at that time, they didn't know this day would be anything significant.
Right.
So I think maybe it wasn't the Friday morning they met Tom.
Well, it's certainly a possibility. Everything's a possibility.
Yeah, and I present it as a possibility, not as the truth, because, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think the truth will ever be found unless someone invents a time machine.
So, what's the response been to the book?
Well, some think it's good. I think I've sold... it was my son who... nearly ordered me to write the book. He said, "You have been researching. If you don't start writing, then you will never get to it." So I started writing. Now he says, "Don't quit your day job." When he hears how many I've sold. But there is a few. I have had some very positive responses from people involved in this. Story, not involved in the story, but interested in the story.
Well, here's what I think is great. You actually finished it. You did it.
Yeah, I did it.
And you've created something that will become a permanent part of history, because I have my copy of it.
Yeah.
And other people have it. And it becomes part of that library of stories about Tom and Laura Foster.
Exactly.
About this idea, this possibility.
Yeah.
And it's a sad state of affairs no matter what, I mean, someone did the deed. I tend to feel a bit like you that it was not Tom.
No.
But he did what a lot of guys would do, at the end, I guess.
Yeah.
Because he was going to hang no matter what. Because he was...
exactly. He even at the gallows... He insisted that he was innocent.
Yeah. He said he did, and then at the end he said, "No, I didn't."
I think it was to save Anne Melton from the gallows. He was a gentleman, even if he wasn't a gentleman. He acted like one.
I think so. He was a rowdy gentleman.
Yeah. And I was that was Monday. I think I visited Mountain City in Tennessee.
Yes.
to do some research for a future novel. That would not be a fact book. That would be a novel. And I was talking to someone at the
about
a murder that took place up there in 1903.
Another murder?
Another murder. This time led to... have you ever heard about a guy called Finley Preston?
Yes.
He was the last man to be publicly hanged in Tennessee. And this novel, it will be a novel, because I have not that many facts, was the murder that led to this execution back in 1905.
Wow.
But the lady at the Welcome Center, she presented me with another Tom Dooley book I never heard of before. And I bought it for $10 or so. So I think I can read it. It's a novella like mine. People are still interested. There's still people who write. Some are better than others, but there's still people who find this story interesting and write books about it.
I don't know they're just going to stop. I don't think it'll ever stop.
I don't think either,
because it's one of those classic stories.
Yeah.
And being the first, national publicized crime of passion.
Yeah.
And titled that.
Yes.
So that's that. I mean, it puts its place in history as the first of something.
Yeah. That's one thing that I wonder about. That is, it was maybe the most publicly known case that Zebulon Vance ever defended.
Right.
And he doesn't mention it with one single word in his papers. His partner in the law firm down in Charlotte, Clement Dowd, who wrote a 400 pages Vance biography, never mentioned this case with a single word.
Right.
So I think maybe Vance was a little bit... He didn't like his own effort.
Yeah. Well, I think the only reason it ended up in Iredell County was because Vance lived in Charlotte.
Yeah.
And we're talking about a time in history that the automobile was not, a daily function. So you're on a horse or a buggy.
Yeah.
And it's a lot further to traverse the roads from Charlotte to Iredell County than it is from Charlotte to Wilkes County.
Also at the 1864 election, Wilkes County was one of the only 3 counties Vance lost the election.
Right.
While in Iredell County, he won a landslide.
Right, well.
So maybe he believed he could have people more on his side in Iredell than in Wilkes.
Yeah, well, he was wrong as far as...
He was wrong. He was wrong.
But he was wrong.
It was strange times.
Yeah, absolutely.
Strange times.
Well, I contend, Jan, that to me the most fascinating part about your book is you and the fact that you come from another country and this has captivated your heart. So it seems like for people of a certain mindset, of a certain curiosity about legend and lore of all sorts, that no matter what part of the world you're in, certain things get your attention.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I'm sure you're right. My son, who is actually trained as a historian in university, it doesn't work as such. He also have some things he just, for some reason, find interesting and dig into in his spare time.
Right.
So I think it's normal.
And hereditary, evidently.
Maybe even so. I also forced him to take part in many of my researches, and he waited in the car while I talked to people around here, and he, of course, he has actually proofread the book. So if you find any errors in the book, the proofreading has been done with a non-native English speaker as well as me. So I take the blame. We had actually a girl down in Florida who is the trained proofwriter, but she got ill, so she couldn't complete the proofreading. So we had to do it ourselves.
Well, I think it's fantastic. As we've messaged back and forth a few times as you lived in your little village and me in my little village here. And it's been a wonderful observation time for me, just seeing this come to life for you. I remember when Charlotte Barnes, we did a piece for our broadcast show with Charlotte at Whippoorwill Academy. We filmed there.
Oh, I seen that.
And that was I had followed her story up until when it was published, so I knew what she was going through. You know, and then there it was. You know, this amazing story. And then her center of influence and her travels puts her in front of a lot of people, and she makes friends, and then you're presented as one of those, and then now you have yours out.
I when I was done, that was around December 2019 or so.
Right.
I leaned back and said to my son, who was the one who forced me to write it, and say, what will happen with all the information I get from now on?
Right.
I have to publish that on my homepage.
Well, you remember Charlotte, what she has done is she did the files,
and then she did the novel.
And it's not a small book.
Oh, no, it's not.
It's not.
I did it the other way around. I published my novella first, and then the research that led to the novella afterwards.
Well, I think you just keep on putting it out there.
I could have. I'm not a good fiction writer.
Right.
That's why I make it short.
Right.
Because I have enough material in my head for a much longer book.
Well, how do we get there? How can people get this book? I know
you can get it from Amazon.
Okay.
And you can even get it in a Kindle version if you don't want to have the paperback version.
So people can get a hard copy on Amazon.
Yeah. And I think also other online bookstores.
Right. That's fantastic.
Yeah. I think the easiest way is to get it from Amazon when you're in America.
Well, Jan, I got to tell you, I couldn't be happier for us to get together and us to share the story of your book and this human thing that brings us together.
Yes.
This love of history and tradition and the passion that drives people to do these things. We get to talk to a lot of folk, you know, on the podcast and then on the TV show, and I like to write about people as well, and it's the thing that I enjoy most.
I can say this interest in the Tom Dooley case has brought me together with so many interesting people in North Carolina.
Right.
I have met you.
Yeah, that's right.
I met Rob McHale. I met Steve Hill down in Statesville. I met Edith when she was still around. Yeah. Now her daughter Margaret and her husband.
Yes.
And even met her daughter, and we correspond from time to time on email. So
you've made friends.
John Hawkins. I met two women down from Granite Falls who was descendants of some of the involved in the case. So,
are you saying that when you've got Tom in your life, you'll never be alone?
I think that's true. I think on our first podcast, Bill Barnes said it something like, I didn't know that when I married Charlotte, I also married Tom Dooley. Something like that.
Right,
that's right. Something like that.
And then he had a wonderful book come out. I loved his Buzzard book.
The one about the turkey vulture.
The turkey vulture.
Grew up among turkeys.
Yeah. I loved that. I loved it because it was an idea that Bill had.
Yeah.
And he needed illustrators, so he finally found the right illustrator.
Yeah, I have the book back home. It's a great book.
It's a wonderful book. Yeah. And to me, it's one of my, I have thousands of books. And I have one bookshelf they're all books that are signed from authors, people that I've met, or either in person or by phone or Zoom. We've connected somehow.
Yeah.
And then I get these books, and those are my most precious books because I know a little bit about the how and the why.
Yeah. I know Charlotte is busy writing a new book.
Yes, that's right.
About her family back in Indiana, where she's originally from.
Well, I can't wait to see it.
No.
Jan, it was great seeing you.
Great seeing you. I'm
so glad you come to the Carolinas because you've done this several times now. Yeah. I'm guessing you're not going to take us off your travel list.
I will not. This is my 17th visit to Western North Carolina.
Wow.
Yeah, and my 19th visit to the States. I have 3 times I've been avoiding this area. Two times in the West and one times up in New England.
Right.
But even my next visit, which is a road trip from Chicago, will take me here in the end, just before I return home.
So when's that going to be?
That will be early August. I will be back.
Of this year?
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
With my son in tow. We will go from Chicago. We visit a lot of his friends around the United States. And then we end here in North Carolina, and we will drive up to Washington and fly home from there.
We have to schedule so we can have dinner.
Yeah.
I want to meet your son, the one that helped with the edit. And that'll be great.
I think I have 3 or 4 days in North Carolina on that trip.
So nice.
I will tell you when we will be here.
Yeah, there you go. We'll try to figure it out. Thanks a lot, Jan. Safe travels as you make your way back.
Thank you, and have a good life until we meet again.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks a lot, Jan.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Life in the Carolinas podcast. If you enjoyed your time with us, please visit the show's website at lifeinthecarolinas.com. Join our mailing list, and we'll keep you updated every week on what we have coming up and other interesting things around the Carolinas. We value you as a podcast subscriber. We'll see you next week. And remember what Carl says, it's never a bad time for a good story.